Hey everyone, I wanted to talk about Takotsubo's cardiomyopathy. In layman's terms, it's known as broken heart syndrome. And I wanted to bring it up because, again, to make another argument that it's worth it to have a mindful practice of some sort. Now, for those of you who kind of just rolled your eyes, oh, he's talking about meditation again. Well, yeah, I think it's really a key component in having a healthy lifestyle. And you don't have to meditate, you don't have to do yoga, you just have to have some dedication towards a mindful practice. And usually the most innocent, non-threatening way to do it is to have some form of relaxation practice at night, some form of relaxation practice in the morning. You do it for about 30 days straight, maybe 5 to 15 minutes at night, 5 to 15 minutes in the morning. Let the brain and let your body taste the way it responds to that kind of practice for 30 days. And see what happens. Then hopefully you'll notice the effects and you'll leapfrog into the next taste or exercise of mindful practice. But anyway, here's the argument. I had a patient that went through this, Takotsubo's cardiomyopathy, and maybe if I explain what happens in its worst case scenario, not as far as the Takotsubo's, but as far as stress, you'll understand why there is benefit for neutralizing the stress response with a mindful practice. So in the case of my patient, she's in her mid-50s, no disease processes, maybe a slightly high cholesterol, relatively, she's not an avid exerciser, but she keeps active, pretty decent body weight, but in a kind of tough relationship. And she was having unusual symptoms pop up, more and more accumulated, and it seemed to correspond with the amount of stress that the relationship was in. Till finally she had to go to the hospital. They kept her for observation, but right before they were about to release her, after a couple of superficial workups, they didn't find anything. They said, well, follow up with Sigil and see if you need further tests outside the hospital. And lo and behold, right before she was discharged, the stressful person, or at least the antagonist to this story, came in. And immediately a fight ensued, an argument ensued. And wouldn't you know, within 15 minutes, my patient dropped to the floor dead. And, well, I should say she flatlined. She lost consciousness, she stopped breathing, they had to resuscitate her, full code. And they luckily brought her back, which would make another argument. I don't want to talk too deeply about this, but it would make another argument for this is why you want to have a stress test in the hospital with a crew around you that's well versed with how to resuscitate. Because if you're on the verge of having a heart attack, or you have bad health history and you have a stress test, then it might happen that you, while having the stress test, have a little bit of ischemia. At least you have a team there that can resuscitate you, because if that happens outside the hospital, if you run to your car in the rain, or if you get into an argument because you just got rear-ended by some teenager, and then the stress response comes, and you're outside the hospital, the survivability of a flatline heart attack outside the hospital, heart failure, is much lower than it is in the hospital. For those of you who don't want to get on a treadmill, you've heard, oh, you can have a heart attack. Well, you can. If you're about to have a heart attack anyway, you can have it if somebody pushes you on a stress test, but the idea is you capture it while you're surrounded by people that can help you. Anyway, so what happened with my patient was she flatlined. They resuscitated her. They gave the cardiac muscle that was failing, that failed right as the person came in and started badgering her again. They gave the cardiac muscle supportive medicines and machines that let the heart do what it has to do, even if it went through this Takotsubo's attack. And now she has a defibrillator machine here that will keep her healthy as long as she gets farther and farther away from the stressful person. And we're working on developing a mindful practice with her. This is a schematic of the heart. I mean, the heart, as you know about it on Valentine's Day, looks like this. But I drew this because it was nice, because you can see that there's a point right here. This point actually is a point. It's called an apex of the heart. Usually the two chambers up here are the atria. They're the pump primers. And then there's two big chambers down here called the ventricles. The left ventricle is the biggest one and usually composes most of this point, the apex. And when the apex is working great, it'll pump for 80 years. The good thing is that the heart will respond and pump more if your body says that it needs to have more blood. Like in times of fight or flight, if you're being chased by a bear, like when I take my hikers up into the national parks, we're thinking there's a bear around the corner, we'll get ready to run. In times when you're being held up, you want to be able to defend your family, so you have to be ready to fight or flight. So when the body senses this, it sets out a whole bunch of hormones to get the heart pumping. One problem is if you're not exercising, if you're a little obese, if you do have some medical problems and the heart is given a whole bunch of stimulation all at the same time in the form of catecholamines, epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, it might not respond well. In fact, there's episodes where this heart, which is a point or apex, the muscle decides, because of the overstimulation from massive amounts of catecholamine response during a stressful event, like the news of a loved one that just died, or what happens all the time is the death anniversary of someone that you lost. Even if that person is healthy, that lost a loved one or became a widower, even if that person is healthy, the stress, the sorrow from the memory of what happened years ago can bring on that same catecholamine response, and it's going to stimulate the apex or the thickest part of the heart abruptly. What usually happens is the heart starts to become rounded, and that's why they call it Takotsubo's. Takotsubo's cardiomyopathy is translated in Japanese as octopus pot or octopus trap. The octopus trap works like this. This is just a regular pot, but the fishermen have found that if there was an unsuspecting octopus that crawled into the pot, it would not be able to get out. And the pot looks fancier than that, but essentially that's what happens with the heart muscle. So the heart muscle, which is supposed to look like this, becomes wide and non-functional. So you have these two atrium that are supposed to be priming a pump, but the pump is just big and dilated. So it doesn't work right. If it doesn't work right to pump, no blood goes out. When no blood goes to the brain, you lose consciousness. When no blood goes to the rest of the body, you lose life. So this is why it's called Takotsubo's. Octopus pot, octopus trap, but the heart just decides to become dilated. That's why it's called cardiomyopathy. Takotsubo's cardiomyopathy. And again, the objective is to support the body during the time that the heart just dilates and is very susceptible to all those catecholamines. Eventually the catecholamines will drop, and hopefully the heart will start to regain its strength again as a muscle and start to pump again. But until that point, you have to be on life-sustaining measures, machines, medicines, breathing machines. You have to be surrounded by a team and a hospital that will be able to support you until you can get to the point where your heart is functioning again. So what we would probably suggest in my clinic is during the times of the death anniversary or before giving the bad news to someone who might be a little frail, it would be important to set them up. And there's always this gray area where if you have somebody that won't take news properly, should you give it to them? If it will result in something called Takotsubo's, then obviously no. For the preservation of the patient, you don't want to give them news until they're ready for it. But at the same time, you want to honor that patient to give them the news that a loved one has passed away. So it's a tough decision, but the more practical problem would be, how do we take care of the person that's suffering during the death anniversary? And that's when we have to come together as a community and support those around you that have gone through the loss of a loved one or that have been on their own. Even if they're doing fine, even if they're not sorrowful, depressed, they're getting outside, especially if the death anniversary is during the season of winter. Seasonal affective disorder on top of the news or the memory of what happened a year, 2 years, 3 years ago might be enough to trigger this event happening again. So reach out to your relatives, be around before the anniversary comes up, just to see how they're doing, or email, telephone call, text, Skype, just to be there for them, and that way they know that they're not alone. And just that alone will help them get through the tough times. When you have nothing but catecholamines, adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine present, and you don't have any serotonin, and you don't have any oxytocin, those are the love hormones versus the stress hormones, well, that's a totally imbalanced body, and that's when the event can occur. I believe that if you're going to expect those catecholamines to be elevated during the death anniversary, it'd be nice to have the other ones, the serotonin and the oxytocins, also just as high. It's my feeling that you can't be in stress response and a love response at the same time. So if you're overwhelming the body with love and happiness, this one doesn't become a bother. You get past the death anniversary and you should be okay. And we should be doing that with all of our relatives, all of our elderly, but we have old folks' homes, we have people that are lonely. It's tough, but I guess that's a society nowadays. So it makes an argument for having a practice of mindfulness at least twice a day, as I mentioned, or share it with somebody. If you know somebody that's going to be going through the event, or if you see somebody on the corner that's lonely, hey, just strike up a conversation, get something to eat for them, give them a flower, give them a gift, just wave. Acknowledgement's always empowering too. So that is what I think about stress response, and that's how and why I say that stress can kill you. But I think love can save you. So by the same token, please try to get mindfulness approach in yourself and to others. Always have mindfulness as one of the key ingredients to being healthy and having a healthy lifestyle, in addition to having some form of healthy thinking, some form of healthy eating, and some form of healthy activity. That's the anti-inflammatory lifestyle I get my patients to experience, and hopefully you can find your way as well. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up in case this was helpful, and subscribe to me for weekly words of wisdom.